You are listening to the global network of podcasters dedicated to the pharmacy profession. Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
Hey, I'd like to welcome our listeners to the Precision Health and PGx podcast, which is a podcast that's been designed specifically for pharmacists and physicians, discussing the role of pharmacogenomics, PGx, in drug response in the genome. This podcast is part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, and we're so proud of Becky Winslow, Dr. Becky Winslow, Dr. Behnaz Sarrami. They've been commanding the ship of our PGx focus for 3 to 4 years now. I'm losing time here. And with the new year coming across 2025, we're going to have so much more content around pharmacogenomics, policy, discussion around disease states, conditions. So we're so excited about this show. This show won Best Podcast in the lists through Welp Magazine, was listed as the 9th most listened to podcast on genetics. We're so proud of the accomplishments of Becky and Behnaz. And with that, here's our next episode.
In a world where one-size-fits-all medications dominate the pharmaceutical industry, precision medicine brings a ray of hope for those seeking customized healthcare. Pharmacists have a unique opportunity to help people in need of specialized testing to ensure medications work as intended. Welcome to Precision Health and PGx, where we unravel the wonders of precision medicine and its potential to revolutionize the way we approach pharmacy care. Get ready to uncover the secrets behind pharmacogenomics and how it's transforming lives, one genome at a time.
So I'm your host, Dr. Becky Winslow, and you're listening to the Precision Health and PGx podcast, just as Todd mentioned. In case you're wondering what happened to the PGx for Pharmacists podcast, well, you're listening to it right now, only with a different name. And with a goal to broaden our listenership outside of pharmacy and pharmacists and broaden our content to include non-pharmacogenomics-based precision health topics. My co-host, Behnaz Sarrami, who's going to introduce herself, and I decided to rebrand the podcast so potential listeners wouldn't self-exclude themselves from listening based on the podcast name.
Yeah, hey, and I'm Behnaz. We're super excited about this new change. No different, like Becky said, than we did on PGx for Pharmacists podcast. We'll continue to explore all things pharmacogenomics related, including pharmacists' role in PGx. Our mission still includes educating and advocating for the broader topic of precision medicine. So we'll continue to accomplish this mission through exclusive interviews and with highly qualified and well-experienced industry leaders.
Today's special guest is Dr. Jeremy Stuart, Chief Scientific Officer and Laboratory Director for Precision Genetics in South Carolina. Dr. Stuart, welcome, and please introduce yourself, and please don't be overly humble. Your pedigree in the laboratory industry is impressive, and many follow you as a key opinion leader. I want our audience to really realize your education and your accomplishments and, quite frankly, how you're qualified to talk on this subject.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you for having me. I'm glad you gave me the prompt not to be humble because I tend to be very hard on myself and I don't like really talking about myself at all. So I appreciate the disclaimer there. So I'm trained as a molecular and cellular biologist. I've always loved biology, even from high school when it was first introduced to me as a subject. And so I went through my college career studying that. I got in with a laboratory that worked. It was a Drosophila laboratory, but we did some molecular work as well. And during that time, I migrated towards the area of public health, and where I got a master's degree in toxicology. One really had nothing to do with the other, but I happened to be able to combine those interests of mine and ended up doing my PhD work at the Harvard School of Public Health. And they had a program called Biological Sciences and Public Health. The idea was to take areas of public health that were considered pandemics, or not pandemics, but epidemics, and devote laboratory and dedicate laboratory work in that direction. So, for example, cancer, you could argue that cancer is an epidemic due to its high frequency in older adults. So I worked in the area of molecular and cellular biology in cancer. That was my training, my PhD training. I did a postdoc at Harvard as well, and I quickly realized that I wanted to try my interests outside academia. Nothing against it. It was just something I just wanted to spread my wings a little bit more. At the time, I was young. I could tolerate a higher risk profile, so I decided to migrate towards startup companies where I felt I could have more of an impact, perhaps wear a few more hats as opposed to just being in the laboratory. I certainly wanted to be in the laboratory, but I also knew that I had interest in other areas. So I joined a company in North Boston, in Beverly, Massachusetts, that ended up developing one of the commercial next generation sequencing technologies. And I would love to tell you and your viewers that that was planned and strategic, but I think anyone who's ever had any success in startups or in companies in general will tell you that there's a big element of luck involved. And will tell you that. I think that's a common thread. There's always hard work, there's always creating opportunity, but there's also luck. And I got lucky. And so the technology, after about 2 years, was acquired by Applied Biosystems. We had to scale it, commercialize it, put it into the field, send it to these genome centers that love to take what you've created and look at it very carefully and then promptly break it over their knee. But that was a wonderful experience because I really got to migrate from a research and development environment into applications. And that was my really first foray into clinical science and clinical laboratory work, where a lot of these genome centers would do pre-validation work, test the limits of the systems, and then as it matured, migrated into the clinical labs. And that's what happened with the technology as well. It just like a computer, how they get smaller and faster and cheaper over time, so does this technology. And when it does that, it can migrate into the clinical space. So my career took a turn when that happened because I started going to a lot of hospital systems, visiting with a lot of physicians, showing these technologies. And around that time, that's when the CPT codes for PGx, or for pharmacogenetic related genes, were published and released. By that time, I had joined a clinical, I went back into startup mode and joined a clinical laboratory that was working with a hospital system, mainly in the area of oncology. But because these PGx related codes have been released, there was a lot of opportunity in that area. And we quickly adopted that into our toolkit. So again, it was partially luck, partial just happenstance, but I became a firsthand developer and user and expert in this area. And it sort of carried me to where I am today through 2 different companies. I've learned a lot of lessons along the way. It's been a lot of fun. I've had a lot of interactions with physicians and really got to know the clinical side. And, it's sort of led me to speaking to you today about done. So what I do typically is, I'll validate the assays. Again, I'm a scientist. That's sort of my training and my identity. Again, I wear a lot of other hats. I've been able to get board certified in the meantime, so I can act as a high complexity CLIA director, laboratory director. I do that as one of my hats, and on the business development side. But really, my first love is to develop these assays, to work in the laboratory, to validate them, to make sure that the laboratory is operating as best as possible, and then serve as the bridge to physicians to talk about the science, how they can use it clinically.
Wow. What a fun story. What a great story. You're exactly right. I think that, for example, Behnaz and I both took a non-traditional pathway. I don't think we could have planned it when we graduated, that this is where we would be today, but we love it. And here we are.
That's right.
True story.
Yeah, I mean, life, what's the saying? Life is what happened to you when you're making plans,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. My best laid plans, took some turns, and here I am, and I love it. So So I appreciate you giving our audience your backstory and especially how you got into pharmacogenomics. And so you and I spoke prior to this recording, and I love what you had to say about the importance of pharmacists. So today we're discussing a topic that I've wanted to cover on the podcast for a while, and that is pharmacists' value in clinical pharmacogenomics lab. And I just want to be clear before we go forward that I'm not referring to pharmacists' value in incorporating pharmacogenomics into medication therapy management. And for example, establishing, launching, evaluating, consulting, and leading clinical pharmacogenomics delivery in clinical settings, such as hospitals, long-term cares, and ambulatory care, where we most often think of pharmacists practicing. Today, we're really focusing on the pharmacist laboratorian. So the pharmacist we're talking about today works for the clinical laboratory as a team member to optimize clinical PGx testing at the lab level in the PGx testing workflow. So I'm so excited for you to join us today and share your firsthand experiences, honestly, with employing a pharmacist in your laboratory, and providing us some specific examples to illustrate how vital that pharmacist was to your lab.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it became very clear as we progressed in our testing and our engagement with physicians that having a real clinical expert, especially in the area of pharmacy, so a PharmD, was very important, not to just the physician engagement, which is a critical role, as well as the business development, but also to the laboratory, because there's for those who don't know, many of the laboratories who do this type of testing, they're very sophisticated experts in their area, which is running the lab, validating a test. What they may not be expertise in is the relationship between the genes and the drugs. What drugs are currently being used that have gene-drug relationships that rise to a level of evidence that we can report on and provide guidance on? A lot of people in the laboratory just say, "Well, just tell me what genes to test, and I'll make it work." Right?
Yes.
They don't have that sort of clinical. They don't necessarily look at that pipeline coming through, and that's where PharmD has been very important for us, is to look at, what's on the horizon, what's the current state of the evidence. And the other aspect of it is the actual report itself. So again, if you're a provider of these tests, so what I mean is a laboratory, typically one of the most important components is not necessarily certainly the test itself and the analytes that are in the test, but the report. What does the report say? How is it organized? How long is it? What does it emphasize? That's a lot. It's a big area where a laboratory, if they're providing that report, needs guidance. And a PharmD has really been helpful in that process. I can give a few specific examples of how that input has helped us configure our reports, but that's another important area that has been extremely helpful. A lot of these assays, the technology providers, I like to call them arms dealers.
Right.
They develop these assays in-house. So a lot of them are pre-configured, and many labs can get up and running with the PGx test. As long as you have the requisite expertise in the laboratory and the compliance, and you can operate a CLIA laboratory, you can go pretty far in terms of getting a test up and running. Really, where a lot of the art is and a lot of the domain expertise relies in is, again, the development of novel markers and gene-drug relationships and looking at the current state of the literature and consensus recommendations. But also, how is the report translated, or how is the report provided to the physician? What does it say? How long is it? Again, how is it organized? Those are real things that make a huge difference, and that often is a black box to the laboratory teams because they just don't have that clinical side or that clinical expertise of what's really important to a physician. And I don't think a lot of people appreciate how busy physicians are.
That's right. Exactly.
If you have a 30-page report and you have to find the drug that you're looking for guidance on page 18, it's probably not going to be, a thing that is adopted widely by physician practice. So that's really where a lot of that input comes in, and it's been extremely helpful for us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's one of the instrumental roles I've played with labs is with that test report design and making it physician friendly.
Yes.
Because you're exactly right. We expect physicians to embrace a test that they didn't necessarily learn about in school. They might not necessarily know how to act on the results. And we're handing them this massive 30-page report, expecting them to act on it. And like you said, they don't have that type of time in their workflows these days. It just doesn't happen, and maybe except in select situations. So that's an excellent point. The clinical perspective and helping the lab to understand the clinical presentation of the information is critical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's a different language that is used now that needs to be learned. So I appreciate that you see the value of PharmDs bringing on to your lab. But is there specific credentials, obviously outside of PharmD, like experience that you think based on what you're seeing now that they would need to have coming into your lab outside of just a PharmD? Like, should they have worked with genetics before? Like, what does that look like based on your needs at the lab?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say specific credentials per se, but it does certainly help. What's been fun for me is to watch the interaction and watch the PharmDs learn as much as I've seen the lab learn from the PharmDs, right? So there's a true yin and yang that I think if you have a good organization and good collaboration, that both sides learn a lot. So for example, a lot of PharmDs in my experience, PGx is, I think being taught in a lot of pharmacy schools, but it is an elective, right, in many places, and it's not necessarily part of a core curriculum. So a lot of PharmDs, this is new to them, believe it or not.
Yes.
Certainly with physicians. So they're not familiar with diplotypes and diplotype phenotype relationships. So it's been fun to watch some of the PharmDs that we work with learn about this and really be eager about it. And of course, it helps them get a running start if they have a little bit of that background and a little bit of that training, even if it's just in the classroom. A lot of the other things too, things like phenoconversion, if they're on like a 2D6 inhibitor, and a lot of reports don't have that aren't sophisticated enough to provide that translation or provide that input. But a PharmD, if they look at a current medication regimen, can provide that feedback to the laboratory to say, guys, is there a way that you can code, is there a way they can get a report that would provide that information right off the bat rather than relying on that. So it's really been helpful to have some PharmDs that have that experience. Most of it's been practical experience, especially PharmDs who've worked with hospital systems and physicians in trying to implement PGx.
Right.
But having said that, I've also had really good success with, just because they have such a foundational knowledge of medications and communicating with physicians. Believe it or not, the genetics part is actually, I think the genetics part and diplotype phenotype translations and things of that sort are easier to learn than the other way around, than learning part of it and all the medications. So I think any PharmD would really, as long as they're an interest and a passion, I think would do very well, as long as they have that communication with the laboratory set up. And we really try to make sure that happens. So we'll have weekly meetings, laboratory meetings where we include the PharmD in our discussions. And just sort of by being part of that and osmosis, you just learn a lot. And then the same goes the other way with the laboratory. And when they talk about the engagements and a PharmD's feedback on the reports and also on, upcoming drugs. So, I mean, a great example is GLP-1 agonists, right?
Yes.
Everyone's asking about, well, can you provide guidance on those? And PharmDs will have a lot to say about that.
Yes. That could be a topic for an entire other episode.
Oh yeah.
GLP variants and what evidence exists and what evidence we need to have that as a test option.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Did the pharmacists have a specific department in the lab they work, like such as medical information or communication, like marketing? I know market access and reimbursement is huge. Like, for example, I worked in the medical affairs department as an MSL, but obviously supported cross-functionally the marketing team to develop clinical content. So do you have a specific department that you assign pharmacists, or kind of they all wear multiple hats depending on the need?
Yeah, based on what our needs as a company, where we put our PharmDs was really on the commercial side, which is just a function of how our organization is structured. So they did a lot, of course, physician engagement was a big part of it, and the business development side, which is to go to various physician practices that are either using our test or considering it or had colleagues who are using it and then talking about it and relating to them on a peer-to-peer level. So in our organization, there was from an org structure standpoint, they were on the commercial side. But having said that, there was so much interaction with the laboratory teams and with the development teams and the IS side, on the IT side, because of the report structure and that feedback, is that there was a lot of crosstalk. So from a formal organization perspective, they were on the commercial side, but from a day-to-day, logistics, interactive perspective, there's a lot of crosstalk. And I think you're underutilizing your PharmD in your organization if they're not doing those multiple interactions with different groups, because I think there's just so much good feedback to have from a PharmD that, again, is new to so many people, especially a laboratory organization.
This episode is brought to you by Thermo Fisher Scientific. Go from treat and wait to test and tailor. Use genetic testing to research how to help patients get the right medication dose for them at the right time, the first time. Pharmacogenomics, or PGx, has the potential to help reduce healthcare costs and help protect lives. Physicians and pharmacists can support the movement to integrate PGx into the standard of care so patients can get tailored treatment with fewer adverse reactions. Thermo Fisher Scientific has been helping to drive PGx research for over a decade, and we continue to invest and participate in collaborations to help make it accessible and affordable. Explore pharmacogenomics at thermofisher.com/PGx education.
I'm really glad you brought that point up that, although, structurally in the organization, we can characterize them with a job title, a PharmD with a job title or a department, they're really valuable across the company or across the lab for helping in various different scopes. Like you said, I mean, for example, one of the places where I think labs have appreciated me the most is on that commercial side, where I help the business development and sales team understand how to talk to prescribers' pain points and letting them know what they're up against in the field when they're trying to sell this product to a physician who may be overworked and understaffed or has concerns, but helping them understand the psychology behind it and helping them to overcome, what they might run up against in the field so that they're more successful. And I think I know that's one of the things that they've appreciated most, that I've done when I've been working with labs.
Yeah. And on the commercial side, there's a customer service element too. Again, that's another department or another arm that I failed to mention, where they are doing a lot of work in, which is, again, a lot of physicians, when they see their first PGx report, you kind of see their eyes get big and they're intimidated. And I understand that because, many of these reports, it's not like a medication action plan where it's like a couple of sentences, right? Or brief.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a 18 to 20 to 30 page report, with a lot of information. And so just having somebody who can kind of guide them the first time through it and just say, look, this is how I look at this. This is what I look out for. This is what this section means. And you don't need to worry about this or that. And it really goes a long way. And it really drives the utilization of the test among providers. Because once they see it once or twice and have someone to talk to about it, they become much more comfortable. Because I don't, we talk about precision medicine a lot and how it's such a wonderful thing, and physicians, everyone's on board with precision medicine. The thing is not a lot of people do it.
Right. Yes.
Outside of oncology.
Right.
And so, you really need that engagement and hand-holding, at least at first, to get them to a place where, they can walk on their own.
Right. And I mean, that is, in my experience, that customer service that you're describing will make or break the success of a PGx test. I had a medical director tell me once that we were not going to do the doctor's work for them. And so we would not be fielding those types of calls. And I thought to myself, oh gosh, well, we'll see how this goes.
You can see the train wreck coming.
I could see it coming, full steam ahead. And needless to say, the prescribers continued to ask for help, and that's what they wanted. And well, yes, we won't go there.
I think we know the end of that story. Yeah.
We know the end of that story. And I think Behnaz has done a lot of work in that area, with the lab she's worked with. Isn't that right, Behnaz?
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
But
yes.
If you don't mind, I can give a specific example on the report side,
Sure.
side of, how a PharmD was so useful to us. And it was one of those moments that we just thought, well, that should have been obvious.
Right.
But just coming from a laboratory and a non-clinical background, you just don't think of it. So, we have a psychotropic report that lists medications related to mental health, antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, antipsychotics. And you'll notice this with many reports, but it lists them, you do what makes sense, right? Oh, I'll just list it in alphabetical order.
Right.
And so you've got antidepressants mixed with ADHD, and you've got just a whole list of medications listed in alphabetical order. And that, from a coding perspective, that makes the developer's life easier. So why not do it? Right? And so, our PharmD looked at this and said, you really need to change this, with all due respect. And what you want to do is you want to organize these drugs by class and subclass. You want to try to reflect how a physician would, in this area, in the area of mental health, would actually go to their tool bag first, second, third. So for example, in the area of antidepressants, you list SNRIs first, SSRIs second, APs third, TCAs last. And then if you want to go alphabetical within those classes, great, go for it, right? First versus second generation antipsychotics, list those in particular order. Because you don't want anyone, many of these reports have a stoplight motif, right? Where it's red, yellow, green. That's very common. You don't want anyone to be steered towards a particular color just because it's a color, right? You want them to have clinical background and expertise first, and then look towards the gene-drug relationship and how the patient, there. And that was sort of just an aha moment for us, because it just made so much sense and it seemed so simple on the surface. But you'd be surprised at, what you see when you look at a lot of the report solutions that are out there. So that was a real defining moment in the utility of having that type of feedback on the report. And that affected things dramatically for us.
We appreciate that specific example. And I mean, you're exactly right. it's, we both contribute vital parts of this process, the laboratory side, and then what the PharmD brings. But helping each other see their blind spots is, I'd say, absolutely one of the best things that comes out of this relationship is helping reveal those blind spots that we might not be aware that we have.
Yeah, and the other important thing is all the things that the pharmacist, you said, brings on board, and special projects that you guys have them do. I know you gave a couple examples, but I'm just wondering if any one of them really stands out that's very impactful to your lab. So, for example, an advisory board is important since that's where you get the feedback from individuals that use your product, or a competitor that may be using a competitor product, and they can give better insight in the clinical utility of that. Yeah. And what they want to see that makes it different and more valuable to them utilizing it, and then compare that to the competitor. So they call it advisory board, but you can call it whatever you want because every lab is different. But is there kind of a special project that stands out that was impactful, or do you have those advisory board, quote unquote? You can't see my potentials there, but
yeah. So we have a couple. I can answer that in a couple different ways. So one of the things that we're very interested in doing is pushing the research, pushing the knowledge base of PGx and how it can be used. And one of the areas that I personally think that is underutilized that could have a big impact is in the area of perioperative medicine. Mm-hmm. So if you think about your experience when you go through a surgical procedure, you're given an anesthetic, you're given a pain medication postoperatively, you're probably giving an antiemetic as well. Mm-hmm. You're a very vulnerable state, right? Maybe an anticoagulant, as well. So there's within a very short window, there are a lot of medications that could be thrown at you. And that can make a big difference depending on how you respond to how much time you spend in the PACU. Given the fact that surgeries are a huge source of revenue for hospital systems. Mm-hmm. The more efficient you can be, the better patient experiences you have. That's going to have a big impact on a hospital system. So we really wanted to push that area, and so we had drafted and submitted a research protocol, clinical study in the area of perioperative medicine to an IRB. And in that, one of the things that we had learned, and we didn't publish this or even present an abstract of it, is that one of the things we learned is that when it came to the utilization of PGx reports and what they say, if we had a PharmD involved in that process, that's sort of that feedback loop to the physician, mm-hmm. Our uptake, again, this is just internal numbers, went from about 20% to 80%. It was a massive difference in the implementation of those results when a PharmD was involved.
That's significant.
So that was a big part of our study protocol, was to have that feedback loop involved with a PharmD. Our study is going through IRB approval now, and we fully intend to implement that as a part of that. But that was sort of an example where we use the experience that we learned from having a PharmD towards a specific project that we're doing in the future. And I think it's going to be a real essential component of the success of the study.
Oh, that's great to hear. I appreciate you sharing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a great example because, Jeremy, I'm sure that we could do a whole podcast as well on the topic of proving the clinical utility of pharmacogenomics and how critical that research is to justifying to payers that this test is clinically useful in their population. And the type of research that you just discussed will help us with that mission, right? So, I think what you're also saying without saying is that, PharmDs play a valuable role in the research and help improve its utility. Would you say that's accurate?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And again, we had sort of proven that to ourselves,
Yes.
without publishing that. And it makes just sense on the surface, right? It's sort of confirming something that you probably already know. You just need to generate that evidence.
That's right.
And so we were not surprised when we saw those numbers. I guess we were a bit surprised in terms of the delta of how much of an effect it made.
Right.
But we certainly wasn't surprised there was a help. Another area too, and this is more speculation, is in the area of compliance, because, if you think about a lot of molecular tests, especially like constitutional tests where you're testing for germline variants or carriers, a lot of those testing, and the payers require this, and a lot of professional society guidelines, they require a genetic counseling, right? They want somebody who's trained to interpret, clinical interpretation. They want that feedback to the physician. And that's not a requirement in the area of PGx, but I wouldn't be surprised as this matures, as this area becomes more and more widespread in hospital systems and clinics, that those types of recommendations and maybe even requirements could be part of the test solution. So, it is a way to perhaps be ahead of that. And who knows what happens, what the FDA will get involved. They certainly have a special place in their heart for PGx testing.
Yes.
And that might be something that they have an opinion about as well.
Well, I'll just share to boost your speculation or endorse your speculation. When helping a laboratory with their technical assessment, MolDX replied to them, "Did a pharmacist even look at this for you?" So I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that payers and the community in general are going to expect that laboratories involve a PharmD with their pharmacogenomics. And I mean, that was priceless to me, of course. I wasn't happy that their assessment was initially denied, but that was a priceless moment in my in my work, was reading that comment. So I think you're absolutely on to something. So but if you were advising other clinical labs, because that's part of what we want to do, is we don't want to just say, oh yeah, it's wonderful for a lab to have a PharmD. What do those labs need to look for when they're leveraging pharmacists? And what would your top recommendations be for, hey, how do I find a PharmD? Do they come to you? Do you seek them out? How can they maximize that value the pharmacist can bring when they're onboarding and bringing this pharmacist on board?
Yeah, so I can share my experience with you, and we've engaged with multiple PharmDs, and they came from different sources. So there are PharmDs that are actively looking for this type of work. We're actively looking for companies, and so we've engaged PharmDs on a consultancy basis. Just as peer consultants to do many of the things that I talked about, especially early on, which was help us, develop our report, give us feedback on what it says and how it says it. What are some markers that we should really be considering when it comes to the development of our tests? Not necessarily markers, but what are the drugs? What are the the high priority targets when it comes to a gene drug relationship? So there's certainly that, and we've gone down that path. We are fortunate to have a relationship with hospital systems, various systems here in the state. Many of those hospital systems have their own PharmDs, right?
Sure.
PharmDs. And some of them may have PGx experience. I can tell you, certainly that's not guaranteed, but I can guarantee you that at least some of them will be interested in working with you so that they can gain that expertise.
Sure.
And that's a really great way to try and work with someone, in the PharmD areas. And we've also engaged with pharmacy schools
Yes.
as well. So there's a lot of rotations and credits that they can earn just by working with you. So I've had discussions with various pharmacy schools about that. And I think that's where some of our employment has come from as well. And so I also think that there's just the open job market. Sometimes, again, just recruiting, purely on a job board and searches, traditional searches, because I think, and you guys could probably speak more to this than I could, but, there's, a lot of consolidation in the pharmacy space when it comes to retail locations. And so the traditional job searches have been another area where we've had some success in as well. And then we just evaluate our candidates, on a one by one. So that's been a lot of the areas that we've been able to recruit from. And then in terms of the traits of the PharmDs, it's, a lot of it's instinct, obviously. I don't look for that genetic background as a prerequisite, because that's going to weed out a lot of people.
Sure.
More about is this something that they really, really have an interest in and really, really like? Because, when you engage with a physician, you have to believe in what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
That's so important. And,
absolutely.
And the ones who do, you can tell the difference. And so, and are also hungry to learn and really like that interaction, like learning that information from the laboratory teams, as well as teaching their knowledge to the laboratory. Well, so those are the main traits that I've looked for.
I think those are great insights, and, not to plug Behnaz and I, but we've got a pretty good handle on on what's out there and who's out there, so we can help labs with that process as well, with helping you guys with identifying maybe a PharmD that would like to work with the lab. So thanks for sharing that insight with our laboratory listeners. So we're running out of time. I would love to have you back on the podcast again at a later date. But for this episode, we're going to have to wrap up. So I'm going to ask you, today's November the 6th, the day after the election. So it's a pretty big day.
Yep.
So the $1 million question that everybody in the laboratory industry is thinking about this morning is, how are yesterday's election results? How do you think it's going to impact the laboratory industry and, specifically the FDA's final rule into laboratory developed tests and, however else you want it, whatever other aspect you want to talk on?
Wow. And I feel like this is a loaded question.
Yes, it is.
So I've thought about this already. I woke up this morning thinking about this question because I think it affects everyone in the laboratory. So you're right.
Yeah, it does.
Issued their final rule. They've issued a lot of their draft guidance, their final rule. They've had various, webinars to help laboratories adjust to these rules. They've got a timeline on a lot of the things that they want to see, and next year, the year after that. And the real question in my mind is, will all this be disrupted? What's going to happen? Is it going to go back to where we were before this, which is, sort of this gray, murky area where we're going to have to rely on Congress to define what is an LDT and versus an in vitro diagnostic?
Yes.
Or will the administration, completely change the FDA's priorities, and go in a different direction? And, my crystal ball is full of mud at this point. I don't think I have a towel big enough to wipe all that mud off, because it is really going to be interesting.
I think so too.
I think, for our organization, we're just going to assume that things are going to be status quo, that the final rule is in effect, that we're going to march forward. I'd rather be prepared, be over prepared than under prepared.
Yes, I agree.
We're going to assume under that, we're going to assume that we're going to make that assumption, but it could completely change. I think a real wild card here in the works, and we'll just have to wait and see. I wish I could give a more definite answer.
Well, if anybody has the answer right now, they could probably get a lot of money for that answer. So.
I don't think the FDA has an answer.
Right, exactly. So, thanks for giving us your perspective on this exciting time in the industry. Needless to say, I'm with you. I've had labs tell me, "Oh, I don't have to worry about that. My test was grandfathered in. We're good. I don't have to do anything." And I'm like, "Whoa, hold on."
Still things you have to do.
Yes, you do. So there is no laboratory developed test except one that's already FDA approved that doesn't have something that they're going to need to work on to meet the FDA's requirements. So yeah, thanks for that insight. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate it very much. Like I mentioned, we're going to have to wrap up this episode. So thanks again, Jeremy, for joining us. For our listeners that want to connect with you further, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So if you go to our website, precisiongenetics.com, you can look at our company and some of the things that we've done. I believe we certainly have an email and contact information that will get routed to me.
Okay.
So any specific questions or anything for that matter, just go there and we'll respond. All
right. So thank you, audience, for tuning in. I mean, without our faithful listeners, we wouldn't have such a successful podcast. And for that, we're very grateful. We do a lot of PGxing here on the Precision Health and PGx podcast, PGx Science, clinical application, and business. And we hope you learned something today.
And you can listen to all our episodes on PGx4, the number 4, rx.com, or your preferred podcast platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Podbean. While you're on the platform, please leave us a 5-star review so our sponsors will continue to make these episodes a podcast possible. We'd love to also hear from you. What can we teach you? What industry updates do you want to learn about? Drop us a message on LinkedIn and let us know.
So until next time, here's to precision health and removing the trial and error from pharmacogenomics.